Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie Bree, and it's been a while since I've done a video. And, I mean, not too long, but it's been a while since I've done kind of a in-depth retrospective type video. And today, I wanted to do another personal history exploration deep dive into my history of computers, specifically personal computers, but also non-PC computing devices. And I don't want to get all into the whole literally every computer I've ever owned, every operating system, none of that. That would take forever. We'd be here until, next Tuesday. But I just want to kind of paint a picture because I am a 43-year-old millennial who did not grow up with a computer in my house. As foreign as that sounds, or anything that you could classify as a computer in my house. And I know that's definitely foreign to you younger kids who have, these smartphones, which are, to us, just a supercomputer in your pocket. But to y'all, it's just, regular utensil or something. Appliance. I don't know how you think of your cell phone. I still see my smartphone as a computer. Because to me, well, it is. But I've done like a year by year, era by era, over the years, skipping over the less important stuff, but on how I developed my affinity for action figures and Transformers specifically. I've done a personal, through the years, history of video game consoles, which a lot of people seemed to appreciate. I even did one specifically honed in on just Nintendo, despite the fact that I was never exclusive to Nintendo. And I thought I would do one that is just computers, because I didn't get my first, what you and I would call a computer, desktop computer, in my house, in my life, at home, that I could interact with daily until 1996, and I was born in 1982. So I was 13, 14 years old by the time I got my first computer in the house. But that computer, which I will get to, is not where my story begins. Because I did have, and I have to stress this, emphasize, heavy, all caps, underlined, limited exposure to computers in very specific capacities in public education, in school. In grade school, elementary school, in the late 80s, when I was attending, kindergarten through like 3rd, 4th grade, we did not have computers in most classrooms. We didn't have what you would call a computer lab. That came much later. And we certainly didn't have, most of us, I would say, because I lived in rural Kansas, so I would argue that probably most, if not all, of my classmates didn't have a computer in the home. Now, I moved around a lot, and so I attended several elementary schools over the years. Delphus, Kansas, Miltonvale, Kansas, Salina, Kansas, Happy Corner, Kansas, Brookville, Kansas, and then Miltonvale again. So, I went to a lot of schools, a lot in Kansas, in grade school. And they all had one thing in common. Until I got to the 6th grade, which was 1995, and that was the second time I was in Miltonvale, Kansas, we did not have a computer lab, a dedicated room where we had multiple computers. Kindergarten, we didn't even have a computer in my kindergarten classroom. We had typewriters, because that's what you did back then. You typed on a mechanical typewriter, smudging ink onto paper. We didn't even have printers in the rooms that had computers didn't even have printers. And there sure as fuck was no internet back then. It existed, but it existed out there in the ether, on television, tangentially, and kind of sort of in the realm of science fiction, but actual, practical, real world, the internet, for all intents and purposes, really didn't exist, or it was not readily available or easily accessible. And this is before there was such a thing as the World Wide Web. There were no websites, web browsers, web servers. Those things didn't exist. If you had the internet, you were using a bulletin board system, BBS, or you were using Usenet, or maybe email. There were no websites, because that just didn't exist yet. They literally hadn't even been invented. And so, the very first computer I ever got to use was actually second grade, which I would have been 7 or 8 years old in second grade. Now, I've told pieces of this story in other videos and in my personal timeline. My second grade teacher recognized that I was fascinated by the computer we had in our classroom, so he would let me stay, not in detention, but just let me stay after school, supervised, and he would teach me how to use the computer. And so I got to learn very, very, very simple, basic computer programming at the time. But then I moved from that school, which was Minneapolis, Kansas, where outside of him, the second grade teacher, having a computer, which was his personal computer he brought from home. He told us that. It was not a computer. It did not belong to the school. The only other computer in that grade school was in the library. And the only 3 things we were allowed to use that computer for in the library: A, you could use it for a card catalog. If you wanted to, you could type in the type of book you were looking for, and it would spit out the Dewey Decimal bullshit catalog info, where to find that book in the library, using the Dewey Decimal System, which today you probably have no clue what I'm talking about when I say Dewey Decimal. You're thinking I'm talking about DuckTales, and I'm not. If you even know what DuckTales is. I guess they brought DuckTales back, so you probably know what DuckTales is. But no, it's not that. But this video is not about Jesus, I'm old. This video is not about the Dewey Decimal System. But that was A, what you could use the computer for. B, you could use it to take these book quizzes. They were like little, I don't know, it was like a multiple choice test. You logged in, you had an account, or you put in your name or whatever, and you would tell it what book you read, and it would quiz you to see what you knew about the book, to basically verify you read the book. And then if you passed, this was called Book It, by the way, your librarian would print off a certificate, or fill one out manually, depending on how they did it, with your name, and you could take it to Pizza Hut and trade it for a free personal pan pizza. The third thing that you could use this computer for, and again, you had to schedule time to use the computer, because there was one computer and there were like 50 kids. So yeah. The other thing you could use the computer for was if it was your designated computer time, and it was your opportunity for whatever amount of time you were allowed, you could play either Oregon Trail, which I did not, because that game sucks balls and it's stupid and I hate it, or one of the various Carmen Sandiego games, where in the world is Carmen Sandiego, where in the USA, where in time, etc., etc. Which I did, because I preferred Carmen Sandiego, an actual legitimate good playable quality game, to the rubbish Oregon Trail that the other kids were enamored by, and I was just like, okay, you do you, but I'm not interested in the Oregon Trail. So I never actually sat down to play the Oregon Trail. I looked over the shoulder of the other kids that played it, because I was waiting for my turn to get on the computer, and I just knew, not for me, no thanks. I don't need to play it to know I won't enjoy it. And that's how it was first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. And I went to different schools, so every school was the same. Usually there would be a computer in the office that the school secretary used for, business purposes. kind of like what you saw on Ferris Bueller's Day Off, keeping track of attendance, etc., grades and things like that. And then maybe you would have a computer in the principal's office, and then you would have the one computer, usually, sometimes two, if it was a better school district with more money. You would have another computer in the library. And that was it. Now, when I got to 6th grade, I want to say we had a, quote, designated computer lab, but that's not actually fully accurate either. We had a space in our library that was designated as our computer lab that had, I want to say, somewhere between 10 to 15 computers at most. Maybe less. It might have been 7 or 8. It might have been 6. I can't remember because that was 1995, y'all. This is 2026. That was a long-ass time ago, okay? But I do vividly remember most schools I went to, you did not have a computer in every classroom, if any. And most of the time you only had a handful of, at most 3 or maybe 4 in the library. But usually it was just one computer in the library. And I say usually because not always. Every school was different. But in general, none of the schools I went to in elementary until 6th grade had a designated space with multiple computers that we could all use at the same time. So that was my, in school. Once I got to 7th grade, we had a computer lab. And then 8th grade, we had to take an actual computer class, like how to use a computer. By the time I got to high school, I did have a computer in the home, but I'm jumping ahead. Because that was late 90s, but I'm jumping ahead. So, growing up from birth till about 12, age 12, so the first 11, 12 years of my life, I had such limited exposure to computers that they were still kind of futuristic sci-fi things to me. I knew that they did exist and some people did have them in their homes. I knew that. I was aware of that. But that was not the reality that I lived in my circle because my peers were poor like me because, poor kids hang out with other poor kids, rich kids hang out with other rich kids, etc., etc. When you're talking small-ass, rural, nowhereville, Kansas, there's no rich kids. There are kids who think they're rich because their parents shop at Walmart instead of Kmart, or vice versa, but they're not actually rich kids, But anyways, before I can get into my first actual, this machine in my house is a computer that we today would say, yes, that's a computer. I want to talk about the proto-computer type device, early almost computer devices I had in my house that prepared me for getting my first computer because of what I specifically wanted to use a computer for. Yes, I knew that computers played video games. I knew that. Obviously, we were playing some educational video games in school. They weren't really video games, but whatever. But I also knew video games, you went to the arcade to play video games, or if you had an Atari or a Nintendo, you could play them at your house or rent them from the Bogarts. We had a store called Bogarts. You've probably never been to a Bogarts, and that word doesn't sound like English to you because, I don't think it is. I think it's German, actually, but it doesn't matter. What does matter is you would rent video games from the video store, or you would play them temporarily at the arcade. We did have an NES in the home, but we didn't get it till 1988, which I was like, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 80. I was 6 at the time we got our NES. So, still young enough to be formative years, but 6 whole years without a Nintendo in my house. Which was the first, thing that we had that functions internally. It's a computer and it functions kind of like a computer but very limited. We had an Atari prior to that, but that is so far removed from what you can do with a computer. Let's just not go down that road, okay? You could turn it into a computer. There was a kit that let you use your Atari like a computer. It supported basic programming. It had a tape drive and a keypad, not a keyboard, but a keypad. But I didn't have those things. I did have the basic cartridge at some point. I couldn't tell you how I got it. You know, thrift store, yard sale, a friend gave it to me when they were getting rid of their cartridges. I don't know. But I came into possession of the Atari Basic cartridge. But that's not really how you use computers. That's not a computer. Now, I've told the story in my How I Got Into Becoming a Writer video, how I got a typewriter when I was 12. And then maybe 11. And then 2 years later, so 95 I got my typewriter. No, 94 I got my typewriter. 96, 95, so it was a year later. Hold on, pause, just give me a second. I got the mechanical typewriter in 94 because I was in 5th grade. Well, it was summer between 5th and 6th grade. I got it in the summer. So it was between, I had already finished 5th grade, hadn't started 6th grade, so that would have been 94, probably. Yeah, 94. Okay, because I turned 12 in 94, so that would have been 6th grade. The next year, when I was in 7th grade, like actually in 7th grade, I got my first electronic typewriter, which was a, I believe Smith Corona, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong. Might have been a different company, don't quote me on this. Basically what you would call what we at the time called a word processor. Now, today you hear word processor, you think Microsoft Office Word. Back then, if you had a computer, your word processor program was WordPerfect. You didn't have Office. It did exist, but we probably didn't have it, because at the time we were using Macs in school, or Apples. Either Apples or Macs, and well, at that time, Office was not on Apple yet. That came later. For those of you that want to Google this, just look when did Office come to Mac, and you'll have a better idea of what I'm talking about. Because it wasn't always there. But, I digress. So this word processor is essentially a digital electronic typewriter. It has a little LED, LCD, I'm not sure which one, just a little tiny screen that you can see the characters you're typing. It moves the little thingy around, and it has it has like a print button, so you type what you want on the screen to preview it, and then you hit the print button, and then the little typewriter mechanism goes through and then just types for you onto the paper, just like you had typed it yourself. So that was neat. You didn't have to use as much whiteout. And then it had a floppy disk drive on the side of it. You could put a 3 3/4 inch floppy disk, 1.44 megabyte disk, that you could save your document to, and then plug it into a computer at school if you had so wanted to, and then continue your work there. Or print it off if you had a printer. I did not have a printer. This is what I initially wanted a computer for, because I wanted to be a writer, and my handwriting sucks, and up to that point all I had was handwritten stories I wrote in notebooks that even I couldn't read, no one else could. And then I had the mechanical typewriter for a little bit that, I could type on, but, we couldn't afford whiteout, so I was stuck with spelling mistakes. So, yeah, still not. A little more readable than my scribble, but not viable, let's say. But still, I was learning. But this thing, I could actually, correct my mistakes and do a better job. But I had no way of putting I had nothing to put that disc in, so it did me no good to save it. And while I could, type up what I wanted and hit the print key and it would print onto the paper, I couldn't put that floppy disk in a computer and print on computer paper, which actually worked out better for me, because printer paper at that time was that, green and yellow shit with the holes on the sides. I wouldn't have wanted to have been printing on that anyways. I wanted to use typewriter paper, which is today, what we call computer paper. But at the time, there was a different type of paper we called computer paper, and that was what we called typing paper, because that's what you put in your typewriter. It's confusing, I know. And then, In 1996, winter of 96, just before Christmas. I didn't get it for Christmas, but I got it just before Christmas. I got my first actual digital computer with a CPU, a keyboard, a motherboard, RAM, all that stuff. You hooked it up to a TV. It had a floppy disk drive. It had a tape cassette drive. And this was an Atari 800 XL that I got used from a thrift store that my dad bought for me. And here's the thing. This was 1996, okay? Windows 95 was out. Pentium 1s were out. Pentium 2s were just around the corner. Doom, things like that had already... Quake was already out. Or about to... Or was getting ready to come out. Descent was already out. Diablo was already out. You know what I mean? Like, computers as a gaming thing, modern, what we think of today as PC gaming, had already... that was already a thing. This Atari 800 XL was an 8-bit computer from, like, I want to say 1978, 79 maybe, that ran Asteroids, Missile Command, Centipede. Do these sound like computer games to you? No, these are old-ass arcade games that you played on your Atari that I could play on this computer. It ran a type of BASIC, Atari BASIC, which is based on Microsoft's BASIC, but whatever. Let's brush aside that. And then also, it had a tape drive that I couldn't do anything with because I had no cassettes with software on them, and I didn't know how to write code to create programs to save to the cassette. And again, it came with a floppy disk drive, and this was the, I believe it's the 5.5 inch, 512 kilobyte, like floppy disks, like the big ones, that I couldn't do anything with because, again, even if I could get the computer to do anything more than just play Pac-Man, that didn't matter. I wasn't going to be able to save it because I couldn't do anything other than just play some games. So even though it was technically a computer, to me it was just a fancy Atari, is literally how I used it. Now, by that time, I was already in middle school. I had already started using Windows 95 with CD-ROM actual desktop computers in school at the computer lab, so I was already getting to experiment with games like SimCity, Wolfenstein 3D, Duke Nukem 3D, Doom, Descent, Spider-Man Cartoon Maker, which was what was it? Some type of interactive encyclopedia type thing. I don't remember what it was called. But it came with a program called Spider-Man Cartoon Maker. I got to play around with that. And other stuff at the time I can't remember at all. Obviously, this was a long time ago. But those are the ones that stand out in my memory. Heretic is another one I played a lot of at the time. Oh, and MechWarrior 2 is another one. The point is, in school, I could actually use modern, real, state-of-the-art for the time computers. Because I was also taking a class, a dedicated computer class, teaching me how to use the word processor, the spreadsheet, the database, and we were also learning very cautiously, they were supervising us, the World Wide Web. And so, I could go to school and use a modern, current, state-of-the-art, current-gen computer at the time, and then go home and use this relic from the 70s. So, I couldn't take those big-ass floppies to school, and they weren't compatible with the hardware, and vice versa, and I couldn't do anything really useful with it. So I just, because I had controllers and cartridges and things, I just used it like a game console. It was another Atari for me. And it was the same games that I had on the actual Atari, so it was like just a fancy Atari. It had maybe better colors, slightly better graphics, but we're, mincing hairs here. or mincing words, splitting hairs, whatever the phrase is. I don't know. I'm tired. But yeah, it just was another game system that had a keyboard built in. That's it. That's all it was. Now, at the time, it was a useful computer and was not state of the art, but comparable to industry. It was competitive with industry standard stuff at the time, the 800 XL. So it wasn't it wasn't a slouch, but it also wasn't an Apple II. Okay? But this was 1996. It wasn't 1970 nothing anymore, so it was useless to me. But I was just happy to have a computer in my home. In 1998, 2 years later, I got my first PC. Intel-based DOS PC. It couldn't tell you, it did not run Windows. I couldn't tell you which version of DOS it had, because I don't remember, but I do know it had a 386 CPU, because when you booted it up, it told you what you had, and it said something 386, and then it told you the number of RAM you had, and I think it was like 4 megabytes or something like that. Not very much. Very slow. This was 1998. So this was a desktop computer that would have been current in like 1990, maybe 91. And it was a Micron computer. And I want to emphasize it being a Micron computer because I lived in Idaho at the time, and Micron is based in Idaho. So it was a relatively easy pickup because, there's loads of old Micron computers floating around this part of the country back then. Most of them have migrated to eBay since then. But at that time, that hadn't happened yet, because eBay did exist in 98, but it was brand fucking new. So nobody was using eBay yet. But it did exist. I want to emphasize that. There was such a thing as eBay. But it was just something that we heard them mention in a special episode of a sitcom we were watching, like Smart Guy. There was an episode dedicated to eBay. And it was like, oh, this thing is cool. But we didn't know what it was or what you did with it or anything else about it. It was just a thing that they talked about in that, one episode of a sitcom and things like that. So it was like, okay, yeah, sure. But, moving on. And then in 1999, a year later, I had turned 16 in September, and we got the first family computer that we shared, me, my mom, my dad, and my sisters, that my grandma bought us, that it had a Pentium, I want to say Pentium 2. It was I think it was a 233 megahertz Pentium 2. It had a 20 gigabyte hard drive. I do remember that. It had a CD-ROM, not rewritable, just ROM. And it had 64 megabytes of RAM, SD RAM, if I'm not mistaken. And it was a compact Presario running Windows 98 SE, or second edition. And yes, it also still had the 3 3/4 inch floppy disk drive built in. The 1.4 megabyte one that we today use a little image of as the save icon in our computer programs. Because, whatever. Anyways, that was my first modern, at the time, not state-of-the-art, because it was a compact Presario, so it was probably a mid-tier desktop home computer, but modern computer at the time. That I could do stuff on that computer at home, save it to a floppy disk, take it to school, plug it into the computers at school, and then continue working, and vice versa. Because again, I was by the time I got to high school, at that point, we had computers in every classroom, we had computers in the library, we had the dedicated computer lab, but we also just had computers everywhere. So we were using computers in our day-to-day life. So I went from computers are just a thing I see in movies like Ferris Bueller or War Games to, okay, now I'm using it every day in my life, and I have one at home. Now, primarily, I was still using it to type up stories and Word documents, essentially. We didn't have Microsoft Office at the time on my home computer. Couldn't afford it. What we had was, I was using Word uh, WordPad, which was a in between Notepad, which is just a very, very basic text editor, and Microsoft Word or Office Word, but like without all the bells and whistles. It was like halfway between Notepad and Word. It was called WordPad. Not a particularly incredibly useful program, but better than just a simple text editor. So I was using that, browsing the internet, because we had Internet Explorer at the time. We were connecting to the internet via dial-up using a service called CompuServe. Who remembers CompuServe? Not AOL. We never had AOL. We always had CompuServe, and then we had direct dial-up through our telephone provider. And then you just dialed in, and it just used your web browser, and then, whatever, Outlook to connect to the email, or you just, logged into the web version and read your emails. Because I was using Yahoo email at the time. I was not using my ISP assigned email address, because who did that? Nobody I knew at the time. So that was my, first, at-home computer. It had Microsoft Paint, which I loved. It wasn't, a more experienced person could have probably done more with it than I did, but I was just using it to, write stories and make lists and keep, track of Word documents that I was saving to floppy disks. And still playing games on it, more modern games than what I could on that hunk-a-chunk Atari from a couple of years earlier. So now I could actually play Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, Quake, Descent, etc., etc. So I was actually playing more modern games. I had a game called Oni, which was a PS2 Dreamcast game, if I'm not mistaken. I believe it was on the Dreamcast and then the PS2, but it was that level of game. So it was like, it was my family's computer. My grandma bought it for us. I bought a RAM upgrade because it had 64 megabytes. I bought a second 64 megabyte chip and upgraded, doubled the RAM. And then I also bought, and I couldn't tell you the specs or the brand or anything else, but I remember buying a 3D graphics video card and plugging it into the, I don't remember if it was PCI or AGP. I couldn't tell you. Whichever one was, if AGP came before PCI, it was that. If PCI came before AGP, it was that. Whichever one came first, it was that. Because my next computer that I got was the next level, the next generation of that slot. So I couldn't tell you. I couldn't remember which graphics card port it used. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you what's in desktop computers today, to tell you the truth. But that's not important. From there, I've always had a computer in the home. My first computer that I bought with my money that I earned from my job working at Domino's as a pizza delivery driver, I saved up for it, and I bought a newer but still compact Presario running Windows XP. I remember it had a 1 gigahertz processor. It was the AMD processor, not the Intel. I do remember that. It had 1 gigabyte of RAM. It had the DVD drive built in, and it was a rewritable, not just a ROM read-only memory. And it actually had a card reader and USB ports on it and everything else. It was a lot newer than that one we got in '99. And I got that computer in 2005. I got it in, I want to say spring of 2005, either March or April, somewhere in there. Maybe May. But it was spring of 2005. And the reason why I remember that is because in June 2005, we moved across country, and I had that computer with me when we moved. But I didn't have it with me prior to that. So I got it because I wasn't working at Domino's at that time, and I bought it when I was working at Domino's because I had another job before Domino's. So I know for a fact it was 2005 that I bought it, but I can't remember if it was February, March, April, or May. It was somewhere in that vicinity. I couldn't tell you the exact specs. I did also buy a video card for it, and I remember it was a Radeon, but I couldn't tell you which Radeon it was. and I upgraded the RAM to what was the maximum that specific motherboard could support. And I also upgraded the hard drive. I don't remember the sizes. I remember putting in a secondary drive and also getting USB hard drives at the time. And they were just hard drives encased in enclosures that had USB ports that you plugged into the computer, and then an AC adapter that you plugged into the wall to power the damn thing. So that's what I was using at the time. My next 5 computers were all desktops. They were either desktops that I pre-built myself, I did that twice, or that I just bought somewhere off of eBay and then customized it. But I couldn't tell you the brands because I was just cobbling them together. And every computer, even if I bought a pre-built off of eBay or Newegg, I bought one off of Newegg one time. And then just replaced anything that I could replace with my own options, I did. And so I kept doing that for a few years. I got my first laptop computer when I was in college in 2011. My first laptop computer. And it was a Toshiba. And I remember that because it had the HD DVD drive built in, and it was running. It was running Windows. I want to say it was running Windows Vista, but it might have. It wasn't 8. It might have been 7, but don't quote me on this because I don't remember what year Windows 7 came out. I know it wasn't 8, so it was somewhere between Vista and 10, but I don't remember if it was Windows 7 or Vista, but I know it wasn't Windows 8 because I made sure not to get a Windows 8. But I couldn't tell you any more than that. I don't remember because this was 2011, and it was my first laptop. And the only reason why I remember it was a Toshiba is because it had the HD DVD drive built in, and I had no use for this. I didn't buy it. The school gave it to me. It was included in one of the classes that I took. So, well, I did buy it, but I bought it with, my Pell Grant money. So I guess the government bought it for me, if you want to get technical. But I bought it for school because I was still using my desktop. The only thing I ever used that laptop for was homework. But eventually, I got to where I had 2 desktops set up side by side, and then the laptop sitting in between the 2. And for a while, I was doing good. I was like, oh yeah, I can multitask and edit videos on this computer, type and do short stories and work on my novel on this computer, and then watch videos like Netflix or play a video game or something on this other computer. I was doing pretty good. Then as time went on, my last desktop I had quit working in 2021. And I have now gotten a new desktop since. That was 2021. I had a desktop at the time. Had it since 2019, so I had it for like 2.5 years-ish. And then it just quit working. I think the power supply crapped out on it or something. And I never bothered to fix it because I had migrated to laptops and PlayStation since then. PlayStation became my go-to multimedia gaming device. I went from PS3 to PS4, which is what I use today. I still have my PS3. I use those both interchangeably for my multimedia, for like watching videos, movies, Blu-ray discs, DVDs, Netflix. Not Netflix because I don't have Netflix, but YouTube, etc. My Netflix, air quotes, is Tubi because I'm poor. I don't have any money. Can't afford Netflix. And as of right now, Tubi is still free. I hope it stays that way, because if it stops being free, then it stops being I stop using it. And then I don't remember all of the laptops I've had over the years, because I got that first one in 2011. It lasted for like 2 years, and then I got another one. It lasted for like 3 years, and I got another one. I very quickly found out that I could make a desktop last about 5 to 7 years, and still, as upgrading it as I went along, still get good consistent use out of it. Laptops had a 2 to 3 year life, and then they were starting to, things were starting to fail. They weren't as fast, things weren't working, the hard drives would die, the fans would crap out, something would happen. I went through 3 laptops in the last 2 years. So, yeah, laptops are, well, not great. Now, the only reason why I keep getting laptops instead of desktops is because, one, I'm poor, so they're cheaper and less to set up. And 2, they're not as cumbersome, and I don't have the space to set up a desktop and to be able to use it comfortably in my setup. Because I'm using the PlayStation for, like, video games and some watching videos and stuff like that. And then the laptop I'm using for making videos and writing, because I am still writing. And social media and music is done on my phone. I have a speaker with a headphone jack. The 1/8, I think it's 1/8 inch headphone jack plug. That I have on my phone. I just plug it in and I can listen to my music that way, and it sounds like music. I don't use the laptop for that because the GUI on the phone is more user-friendly than the GUI on the desktop app, because it just is for some reason. And I use any social media I'm doing on the phone. So while I record and edit and upload my YouTube videos from the laptop, I reply to comments and manage my Creator Studio and things like that from the phone, because it's just easier. I do my shorts from the phone, obviously, because that's just the way shorts are done. And so that's what I have today. But I wanted to kind of just do this reminisce, which I've probably done a video similar to this, maybe with a different reason or a different purpose. But I know I've talked about most of these things previously at some point. But I really wanted to hone in on this specific path because I want to emphasize that there was a time where your computer was not an all-in-one box. It was very primitive, very limited. You still had to have a VCR for movies. You still had to have a Nintendo for video games. And then your computer you could use as a word processor and do some programming and tinkering with. And you could do, like, some doodling if you had the mouse or the doodle pad. The pen pad is what it was called, I think, to draw if you had a paint program or something. So and then in the 90s they became a universal all-in-one media box. And the reason why I stuck with desktops is because I used them as an all-in-one media box. I did my video editing, played my video games, watched DVDs and Blu-rays on them because I've always had a Blu-ray drive. I have a Blu-ray drive on this laptop. I have a USB external Blu-ray drive that I do not use to watch movies on this laptop. If I'm going to watch a Blu-ray, I do it on my PlayStation because it's hooked up to my 46-inch 1080p high-definition television, not this 15.5-inch piece of shit 720p. Well, it's not 720p. It's actually... it is a 4K monitor, but it's useless at 4K because pixels are too small. So I actually have it set at 720p because I can actually see it because my eyes suck. But anyways, but I have a Blu-ray drive. You see these things here? I have those, but I have actual recordable Blu-ray discs. Yes, Blu-ray recordables. 25 gigabyte Blu-ray, BDRs I think is what they're called. Or maybe BDR. No, I think they're BDRs. I have a stack of them, of about 50-ish recordable Blu-ray discs. And I have a USB Blu-ray drive rewriter, not for watching movies on, but for backing up data. Because if you know anything about computers, you've heard this phrase before. In regards to backups, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So back everything up. I do have flash drives. I have SD cards, and I have USB hard drives. So that's my backup setup. If I have something important, well, if it'll upload to the cloud, I'll upload it. If it's super important and not a massive file size, I'll make a backup to the cloud. And then everything else, I'll put on my backup hard drive. And then I've got a stack of USB flash drives that are for specific things. I'll back up to those drives. And then the really important stuff, once I have 25 gigabytes worth, I'll burn a Blu-ray disc and have a hard copy that I can keep in one of these plastic jewel cases that theoretically will be better well preserved than some of these, flash-based products and hard drives. Because hard drives are going to fail, flash drives have a limited life, and SSD drives are just fancy flash drives, essentially. Let's be honest. And we can argue about the technical merits and benefits of one over the other. Listen, I use hard drives over SSDs for a reason. It's just what I use. I do not like SSDs. I know that eventually I'm going to have to, and I have my backup hard drive that I back things up for preservation so that I don't lose shit is a hard drive that once it gets full, I back those files up to the Blu-ray. The drive that I use that I keep the files on, that I'm using and interacting with and recalling and processing on the computer on a regular basis, I do keep on an SSD drive because it's faster. File access speeds are faster. Data access. Read-write speeds aren't as, whatever. It's just faster. So for backing up, I put it on the hard drive. Not because it's like secure. It's just I happen to have a hard drive that I can back things up to, and then once I have 25 gigabytes worth of stuff allocated, I burn it to a Blu-ray disc, and then stick it in a folder somewhere that's only I know how to get to. And then if it's something that I really don't want to lose, and if it's not like a massive file size, I'll upload it to the cloud because I have multiple cloud accounts because they're free, so why not have more than one? You can have 7 Google Drive accounts. You don't need to worry about paying extra to double your Google Drive. Just sign up for a free Google account and you've doubled your Google Drive space for free. Now, if you need the double capacity because you're uploading large files, well, there's this magical thing called WinZip. Look into it. Alright, that's it. That's my personal history with computers. I guess updated, revised, revisited, because I've probably done this video before. I don't know. I don't go back and look at my catalog to see what I've talked about in the past. Why would I? You're not going back to watch that old video. You're watching this video. Stay cool.